I just wanted to make sure because some people can't be here today and they really wanted to see you. So
Oh,
we're
well,
gonna
thank
put it,
you. Thank you
yeah,
for
we're gonna put
sharing
it
it.
on our library website. So when we first started reading these books, like I said, we jumped in at book 6, and because of the numbering issue, um,
Mhm.
and it wasn't a big deal, but a lot of us, like myself, were like, boy, it seems like a lot has happened, you know. And then we realized to start over with Death by Cashmere.
Oh,
Um,
that's good. Yeah,
yeah.
I was just writing today about the new book, which is the 18th book that I'm working on now, and realizing that people who start at the beginning, it's sort of funny because they're not married, and in the book I'm writing, there's lots of little kids. So,
Yeah. So I read your biography, a few times getting ready for this. And of course you were born in Manitowoc, or you lived there for a while?
I was born there. My
Okay.
family lived there.
Okay. And so in reading your biography, I noticed there was a lot of friends that really seemed to make an impact on your life and on your writing.
Ah, yes.
Um, and it kind of shows through in your books also. Do you want to start from the beginning and give us a little um, rundown of, from Manitowoc, how you ended up in Gloucester?
Oh, certainly. I can do that quickly. I left, let's see, I lived in Manitowoc until I graduated from high school. But for the last 4 years for high school, I went to school in Green Bay. I went to St. Joe's Academy. And then I went on to college in St. Louis. And I went to graduate school at the University of Indiana, and I met my husband there. So I ended up in Kansas City because we got married and he had a job there. And that's when I started writing this.
Okay.
Um, so it was kind of I've lived on the East Coast, the middle of the country, but all my kids went to school in California at some point. So I, and that meant every trip we took was to California to visit children in college. Um, we ended up here in Gloucester, which is on Cape Ann, which is just north of Boston, sticking right out into the water. Before I started writing the Seaside Knitters, I lived in Kansas City, and that's where I started writing the series. And the reason I set it out here was because I had a daughter who had just gotten married and she was planning on having grandchildren for me. So I wanted an excuse to come out to Gloucester to visit her. It's also tax deductible if you're a writer. So there were all kinds of reasons to set it on the East Coast. I also had always wanted to live on the East Coast. I really like the water, and my husband did too. He was born on the ocean in Virginia. So my agent and I talked about it when I was creating this series. I wrote a not short lived, but I wrote a knitting series before this. I mean, a quilting series before this. And that was set in Kansas, where I was living at the time. It was published by a small publisher. And I had written a couple books before that, and I had an agent for those books whose office is in New York. And anyway, I wrote 3 of the quilting mysteries. And someone sent one to my agent, and she suggested we try and get the rights back from the small publisher who wasn't marketing them widely. It was actually a publisher of quilting how-to books, and they just wanted a little mystery series on the side that involved quilting. And I don't know if it was because it was a small publisher, I'm not sure, but we couldn't get the rights back. So my agent suggested that I start a new series with the same flavor because she had liked those books and she thought there was a market for them, but that I would have to change the series considerably, bring in different people, of course. And her assistant at the time was a very, very accomplished knitter. She was young, she was in her 20s, but she was just terrific. She actually did her own knitting patterns. And so they suggested to me that I write a series that was anchored by a yarn shop. It's not about knitting, but they knit. And I love that idea. My grandmother had taught me how to knit when I was 10, and as so many of us started that way. And the assistant said she'd be glad to help with any technical things because she knew more advanced things about knitting than I did. So that's how the Seaside Knitters got started. And from the beginning, it was interesting that in your introduction, you mentioned friendship. In the beginning, I decided I really wanted the book to be about friendship as much as I wanted it to be a mystery. And so I wanted a generational gap between the characters because I have friends who are in their 90s and I have friends who are in their 50s. So I love that about real friendship, that age doesn't matter. So what I did was I decided on 4 characters and I wrote essays about each of them so I could get to know them a little bit. What I wrote in those essays, I was rereading them today, and none of that comes into the book, but it tells you it told me who they were, so I could develop the character as I wrote the books. And I sent the essays to my agent in New York, and I also sent 2 chapters of Death by Cashmere, actually. And she really liked it. And she ended up being able to sell it with my essays and the 2 chapters. And so she found me a new publisher. And so I started writing. And that first publisher was Penguin Random House. And I think the first 11 maybe are published by them. They still distribute them. But another publisher is doing the publishing, and they wanted to put their own stamp on it, which ended up being very confusing to my wonderful readers. They started the books, they started number 12, calling it number 1. I may have my numbers mixed up. And they added the word society somehow in the subtitle. And I've gotten so many letters about that. It was so confusing to people. And had I had more chutzpah, I guess I would have protested, although I didn't really I thought it was odd they did it, but I didn't realize the confusion it would cause. And that's why on my website, and anytime I get a chance, I list them in their real order. Although my publisher still puts so number 17 will be, or 18 will be, I'm not sure, 7. Anyway, that's how the series started. And I wanted it to be on the East Coast. So I would come out and visit my daughter a lot. And I'd walk around and get to know the lobstermen and get to know people who lived in this town. But it was still kind of hard to write it from Kansas because there's not a lot of ocean around Kansas.
Right.
But it was, I visited so often that it worked out fine. We finally moved here as a result of downsizing. Our kids had all gotten married and left home and left the state, actually, We had one in Georgia, one in California, and one in here in I want to say Sea Harbor. I still tell people in Gloucester that's where I live. I get the names mixed up. And somehow daughters, the other two are boys, and somehow daughters kind of win out. So we decided, and my husband loved Gloucester. So we decided to move here. And that was a turning point too for me in the books because it was so much easier. When I got stuck, I'm 2 blocks from the ocean. I could just walk along the ocean and look at people and wonder, could they kill someone? Or um, and the flavor of the town was right there at my fingertips. So it was helpful. It's not necessary to live in the town in which you're writing about, but it was very helpful. And the other help I have in writing my books are the 4 women who I've been living with now for like 17 years. Nell, Bertie, Izzy, and Cass. And I talk to them, when I'm having trouble moving a book ahead, I say, what would you do? What would you say? And it's always interesting because they're not modeled after anyone in particular, but I have a Bertie in my life. I have my philosophy professor in college is now 96, and she's the most wonderful, wise, kind woman I have ever met. And in my book, she becomes Bertie, or Bertie becomes her, I guess. Although Bertie's been married a couple times, and my friend Rosemary is a nun, so she's she's not in that scene. But anyway, she recognizes herself, and she's been my best fan. I mean, and she said the best thing about 96 is that she forgets them so she can keep reading them over and over again. And she's now in a retirement or an assisted living home. And she insisted the library, she got a used bookstore to donate every one of my books. And then she got her library in the assisted living place to dedicate a shelf to my mysteries. And so I heard from her yesterday, and she's starting on I think the 3rd book in the series. And she said, the best thing is, I don't know who did it. But the interesting thing is, when my publisher finally got the rights not to publish the quilting mysteries traditionally, but to put them online as ebooks, I had to re-edit them. And I was editing one of them, and I realized I had no idea who did it. So even though I wrote it, anyway, that maybe is my own memory or fuzzy memory coming to play. But that's now, as far as I know, was it Jeanette asked, she said sometimes people are interested in the style or my method of writing. And usually they categorize writers into pantsers and plotters. And plotters write from an outline, and pantsers write from the seat of their pants. Unfortunately, I fall into the latter, which makes it really hard for me. But I wrote one book in which I knew who was going to die, and I knew who the murderer was. It was one of my early books, and I don't think it was Death by Cat. No, it wasn't Death by Cashmere. It was maybe the 3rd or 4th book. And I sent it to my editor, and she said she really, really liked it. And she said there was only one thing wrong with it. She said, you have the wrong person killing the person who dies. And I just panicked. I just thought, I have to rewrite the whole book. And she said, no, no, leave it like it is, but you have to pick someone else because I knew from the second page who did it. And that's because I knew. And I think I put in clues that were so obvious. So I found that writing as a pantser has a real benefit for me. It also kills me sometimes because I never know when I start the book who's going to die or who did it. And sometimes because of that, one criticism I have gotten from several of my editors when they send it back to me, and if there are things they don't understand or whatever, and was that I take too long to get to the murder. And the reason that happens is because I have no idea who's going to die. So I have to kind of get to know people. And I would never kill one of my protagonists or even anyone in their family. Or now I've gotten to like the people who live in the town. So I don't like to kill them. So it's getting harder and harder to find people to kill. But you do, if you look hard enough, you can find someone, I guess. In fact, the last book I wrote, I really liked the person, and it was hard that I had to let him go. But sometimes that's how the book evolves. I do try, because of my editor's comments, to have the murder sooner rather than halfway through the book. And I've read books that where it happens too late, and I don't like that. So I'm assuming readers don't like that either. Another, I may be anticipating some of your questions, but another thing that Anita or Jeanette mentioned was inspiration, and I wasn't sure if that's interpreted as the idea for the mystery or and in a way they go together, actually. I'm often inspired by a single scene in a book, and only once has that gotten me into trouble. The most recent book, Cape Ann, where I live, has beautiful birds, and bird watching is a huge hobby around here. And I got interested. I haven't become a bird watcher, but I got really interested in it. And so I decided to include that in the book in some way. Maybe just a setting, maybe it would have more meaning once I started writing the book. And the other thing I knew was that I wanted to get to know Birdie better. I wanted to know a part of her life that she hadn't told me about. And so those, in a way, were inspiration. I had Birdie be the bird watcher. I had no idea when I named her Birdie, she would eventually be watching birds. But um, so that was an inspiration for that book. The one inspiration that got me into trouble, and it was when my daughter was pregnant. And so I had pregnancy on my mind. And my husband and I were visiting her on Cape Ann. And we were renting a little house down near an area called Niles Beach. And every day, Donna and I would walk along Niles Beach just to get some more early morning exercise. And one morning we were walking along Niles Beach, and we saw a baby's car seat sitting on the beach, but it was early and and we looked all over, and there was no one around. And we thought, that's weird because, you can't take the baby home without the car seat, so you don't really forget it. Um, and the next day, but we left it. The next day we walked by, and the same thing happened. It was still sitting there, and there were people on the beach, but no babies. There was an old man walking a dog and a guy fishing, but there weren't any babies, and the car seat was still there. That night there was a storm, and the next day we walked by, and the car seat was still there, filled with sand. And it was off-putting. I mean, it disturbed us, but we figured somehow someone had discarded, and it wasn't an old car seat. It looked new. But we forgot about it. But I couldn't forget about it because of my daughter's pregnancy, I guess. So I had Izzy running along that shore every day. I can't remember what, I think it's maybe Angora Alibi. I'm not sure. It's the book in which she has a baby. So my daughter had a baby. So Izzy had to have a baby because there's a lot of Izzy in my daughter. So Izzy was running by, and the third day, a storm came, and Izzy saw this sand logged, and she couldn't stand looking at it, so she threw it in the trunk of her car. And I wrote that up into a chapter and sent it to my editor. They always they contract me for however many books I will agree to ahead of time, but they don't ask for any kind of synopsis. But when I finish one book and write another, I send them like a 3-paragraph synopsis that doesn't mean anything because the book always changes. And I will send a chapter if I have one. And I happened to have one that time, so I sent it to her. Well, darned if she didn't fall in love with that chapter. But I had no idea what would happen to a car seat on a beach. And it was a very difficult thing for me to deal with because I would never hurt a baby. So it couldn't involve a baby. But in case you haven't read that, I won't tell you what happened to the car seat. You'll have to read the book. So that's um, one inspiration, one reason for an inspiration. And sometimes it's just that I want to find out more about Izzy, or I want to find out more about Nell, who I kind of see myself more as Nell. I love to cook, and she loves to cook. She can cook better than well, in the book, she can cook and knit really well. I cook maybe better, a little better than I knit, but I love to knit. It's my therapy. Anyway, now I've lost track of what I was talking about. Oh, inspiration. The new book is called Herringbone Harbor. And how did I get the info? I'm writing that now. I should certainly know how I got the inspiration for it. But I can't remember. And I'm still just muddling through that book. I'm trying very hard. It has to be finished next month. And I have someone murdered. So, and speaking of murdered, murder in my books is a little bit like Agatha Christie's. It's never really quite as important. Like it happens, and then there's not blood, there's nothing like that somehow. It's and so then you can go have tea after you've read about the murder. In this book, it's still not detailed. It's just, well, the police found out he was poisoned, or the police found out. And this book has a harsher murder than I've had in any book, because a gun was used. And I'm very afraid of guns. I don't touch them. And so it was I knew nothing about guns. I didn't know even what kind of gun, but it fit the story. And oh, I know how I got inspired now. It was from a newspaper article. So that does happen. I had read a story about a similar murder. I still didn't know, though, who was going to get murdered. And I'm not sure right now who did it. I think I know, but I'm trying not to, because if I know, I might let you know on page 200 instead of page 250. Inspiration also came just because I've always loved mysteries. And so it seemed logical I would segue into mysteries when I started writing. I would like to write something else sometime. I would like to write the kind of book I really love to read. Believe it or not, there's only a couple of mysteries. I read mysteries all my young adult life. And when I was a kid, of course, I read Nancy Drew. Um, and I read more James Patterson kind of mysteries, or I loved all those. And oh, what's his name? Oh, he writes a lot about tennis players. But and Sue Grafton's books I read. But now I read mostly family stories. Oh, I just read the book. You librarians will know about this. I mean, I can't think of the name of it, but it's the woman who becomes friends with an octopus. I don't know if any of you read that. What is?
Peaceful Creatures?
Yes, that's it. I love that book. I I know not everybody would like it, but I just was crazy about it. I love the lady in it, and I love the octopus. But so, and I like to read family sagas. I like Ann Taylor, and I read a lot of Sue Miller's. I don't know if she's still writing, but books about family issues, something that happens in a family, and then how they work around it, and how their love can still work through it, which is a little bit what I like to do with my characters in the Sea Harbor Mysteries. I like to deal with. I see the four women as you and as me and their friends. You know, they're people. The Seaside Knitters are the kind of people. If someone's sick, they'll take soup, and if someone has cancer, they'll knit them hats to keep their heads warm. If there's a death in the family, you know, they'll bring meals. If a friend is in trouble, they'll somehow figure out how to solve her issues. And they each, as I see them in my head, approach it in a different way. Izzy, who used to be a lawyer at one time, you know, is a little more methodical. And Cass is just a little more brash in the way she approaches things. And Birdie is just wise and wonderful, and everybody likes her. So they don't always like Cass. They don't. Izzy doesn't know everyone like Birdie does. And so I try to stay close to who they are. And I also hope, and this is one of the difficulties in writing a series over a single book. You want to still make them interesting as the readers, as kind readers, like some of you who are reading them in order. I just love that. But I don't want you to get sick of them. And so I try to have the four characters maybe advance in their lives, get nurturing their own souls, that sort of thing. And the other thing is, I locked myself in a little bit by establishing a pattern in their lives that I always fear will be boring to readers. One is that they knit every single Thursday night, and every Thursday night Nell brings dinner. But I think probably some of you do that. You know, you have a certain day and you do it every day. That may be even more important to some of us that are not working, or and so I can't ditch that, and especially because of the knitting. And the other thing is, I had them on Fridays eating dinner on the Endicott's deck. And I finally, in this book that I'm writing now, I have found a subtle way to go from the night they're knitting, and I just skip over Friday. I don't talk about it. And so you just assume they had dinner there because it just gets too, unless something really spectacular can happen at that dinner, it doesn't move the story along. And readers who have read about this dinner for a number of years um, probably could write that chapter. So those are some of the problems with writing a series. And that's probably one of the reasons I'd like to take a stab at writing about a family, a book about a mom and a dad and kids and deaths and births and things like that. My agent calls it my Sunday project. And I do think of that on Sundays sometimes, and I jot down some things, but usually I'm working on another book and the deadline, I always seem to be approaching a deadline. And I just, I can't get one book out of my head and start on another one. So if any of you have any ideas for my saga, my family saga, you're welcome to send them to me. I'll even give you credit. Another thing that's really helpful to me in writing is that I have a very good friend who uh, is also a writer. And she started out writing a similar series to what I write. It was called the Jenny Kane series. I don't know if any of you have read those. And then she moved into single title books. And then she kind of stopped writing for a while, but she's just a wonderful writer. And so she has helped me a lot. She will read. I just sent her 10 chapters, mostly just to have her read them quickly and say, yeah, chapter 3 doesn't follow from chapter 2. You need to slip something in there, that sort of thing. If it confuses her, she figures it'll confuse everybody. So that's really helpful to me. In fact, when I was writing was it a Twisted Skein or the one before this? I think it was the one before this. I have to keep a list of them, and I forget what they're about. So um, anyway, we had moved by then to Gloucester, and the same time we moved to Gloucester, she was my best friend in Kansas City, but she decided she'd move too. So she moved to South Carolina. And I was really stuck on this book, and I had some things going on in our family life, and I just couldn't push it. And so she said, come to Charleston and we'll rent a little cabin on Folly Island, and I'll just make sure you write a lot. And so I did. I went to Charleston and we spent a week on Folly Island or in the Charleston Library. And at night, if I felt like it, I could talk to her about the book. She was working on her own book too. And the two of us got so much written. It was one summer we did that in Kansas City. I had a screen and porch attached to my house, or we did. And Nancy and I spent the entire summer writing out on that porch. And we set rules. If we went into the kitchen to get something to eat, we could talk in there, but we were not allowed to talk to each other on the porch. And we had a backyard that she or I could walk around in if we needed exercise or inspiration, but we didn't disturb each other. And then at 5 o'clock, we'd have a glass of wine and we'd talk about the books if we wanted to. So having a writing partner in that way is a wonderful thing. And actually, she is even more instrumental in my writing. She's really the reason I started writing. Her name is Nancy Picard, by the way, in case any of you have read her books. She's really the reason I started writing mysteries because after I wrote the quilting mysteries, I think it was, my last child was getting ready to graduate from high school, and I didn't want to be in the house by myself all day. So I got a job at a bioethics place in editing a journal. And Nancy had and this was like my second year of working there, second or third. And Nancy had two books to write because of a conflicting thing. And she was late on both books. And the second one, she really wasn't late. She hadn't started it. And it was, and she panicked and she said, "Would you help me write it?" So I said, sure. So I quit my job because I was missing writing. And for about 2 weeks, we met every day and we brainstormed a book. And that time I did sort of have an outline because it was Nancy's book. So we were doing it. And it was so long ago, though, that we didn't have computers that could talk to each other. So I would write a chapter, print it out, give it to her, and she'd be working on her book while I was doing that. As soon as she got it, she'd type it into her computer and change things as she went along. I'd be writing the next chapter while she was doing that. And so we wrote the entire book that way. I essentially wrote each chapter first, and then she rewrote them to put her style into the book. And at the end of it, we weren't sure what to do. We didn't know if we should publish it as it came from both of us, or just have Nancy be the author, which was fine with me because I had learned how to write a mystery. I had learned about, where you plant clues and where you put red herrings and the pace of a cozy mystery. And she was winning every award in the mystery industry at that time. So we went to her agent and asked her agent what she would suggest. And she said we had two options. We could go back to the publisher and kind of resubmit it as coming from both of us. Or we could put it under Nancy's name. She would acknowledge me, and the agent would split the royalties. And she said the problem with the first was that the publisher might well cancel it because Nancy was so late. She was already past her deadline when we started writing the book. And they were getting kind of antsy about that. And we all felt it was probably a strong possibility. So we did the other way. And it was great. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And that's what gave me the courage, I guess, to start my own series. And I found I loved it. I thought when she first asked me, I thought, I can't do this. I love mysteries, but I can't possibly write one. And the reason I thought I couldn't was because I've always been kind of dense when it comes to math. And I always equated mysteries to math. Now, I don't have any idea why I did that. And Nancy refused to take that as a reason. And she said, yes, you can. You've written a couple other books and I've read them. They're great. We'll do this. So with her encouragement and her expertise, I managed to get through this book with her. And I can't even remember the name of the book. But anyway, it ended up coming out and we were both happy and they didn't cancel her contract. So another thing that Jeanette mentioned was new projects. And I've told you my dream project, but my real life project, last year, before I had finished A Twisted Skein, which came out a couple of months ago, I think. It came out in December, so a month ago. They came back, my publisher through my agent came back and asked if I would sign another contract because they were planning ahead. They usually don't do that. They would wait until one of my contracts was up, and then they would either, I'd say I'd like to write another book, and they'd say, well, send us a little synopsis, and they'd decide and offer me or not offer me a contract. And for some reason, they came to me early and they asked if I would be interested in continuing the series. And I was I was questioning it because my husband had a stroke and I was his caretaker. And he is the one who insisted that that I do it. And I mean, he wasn't, unfortunately, one of those people who recovered greatly from the stroke. He was unable to walk and things like that. So I was truly a caretaker, but I was home all the time too. And he convinced me. He insisted I sign another contract. And then he started giving me some ideas. And so I did. I signed another 3-book contract. And almost immediately regretted it because my husband got really sick a couple months ago and he died recently. So I hadn't done anything on the book. So that's what I'm working on right now. But he had given me ideas for it and he's helping me through it. And it was good. I agreed because it gave me my 4 friends to help me through it. And it gave me my readers, and I'm glad I did it. So somehow I will finish this book by next month. um, do you have any questions? I can.
Do you see an end to the series?
Well, I know I have 3 books to write. The one I'm writing right now is the first in that series. Is that right? Yeah, 18, 19, and 20. So that'll be 20 books. I think about that. I also think about an obligation, if I'm going to end it, to let my readers end it with me, in a way. I don't know what that would be. I also think that some series should end, and I'm hoping my publisher had some intuition that mine wasn't one of them. I think some series go on too long, and I really don't want I don't want that to happen. You want to go out while people still like the book. You don't want to write the book that's pretty awful and people say, didn't enjoy that. I don't think I'll ever read this writer again. So I don't know how it will end. I just read something though that maybe it was a television series, and somebody wrote that was just a perfect ending to the series. Oh, I know what it was. It was Succession, which isn't exactly a cozy mystery. But all the reviewers said it had to end. It ended when it should have. So I do want that for the series. I've invested enough in it, and my readers have been really wonderful. Which is one reason I keep writing. It's a letter I'll get from someone saying something that, they read it to their grandmother or their mother when she was sick and things like that. One of the things I didn't expect when I became a writer of a series like this is is the contact I would have with other people. There's a woman who lives in London who really enjoyed my books and started writing to me. And but she wrote really personal letters, and so I would answer them. And I don't mean letters, I mean Gmail. And over the last 3 or 4 years, we've become really close friends. I mean, I know a lot about her family. She actually has a farm in Connecticut, so she's from the United States, but they've lived in London for 15 years, I think. And now her mother sends me notes, and her husband is an architect designing some great apartment building in Potter's Field in London, and I've never been there, so I feel kind of through Kristen I have. And there was also a woman in Florida who sent me she did the same thing. She would send me notes every now and then. And then her husband, well, I guess her husband was sick when she started reading my books, because that's why they moved to Florida, to be near a Mayo Clinic down there. And then her husband died. And she wrote me the most beautiful letter about the anniversary of his death, the day that was the anniversary of his death. And she wrote me and told me that it was going to be the next day. And she told me how what she was trying to prepare for it. So she said she knew one of the things she was going to do was go down to the seashore and sit in the sand and think about him. And she said then she was going to sit in her lawn chair and she was going to finish reading. I can't even remember the book right now, because she said her friends in the book would give her comfort. And I saved that letter. When I give talks, different places, I've read pieces of it because it was just so touching. And I didn't know a lot about her, like I do about my friend in England, but we kept sending notes back and forth. I'd remember her husband's death and things like that. And now and then I still get a note from her, but so I looked her up on Facebook, and she's this small little white-haired lady who's just so vivacious and wonderful. And she was married to Jimmy, who was this huge Black man. And she has this amazing daughter who works for NGOs in Africa. And I see her on Facebook. She's just this very accomplished, intelligent woman. And she's got 2 sons and little grandkids that look more like Jimmy than they do like her. But I've been taken to other worlds through my amazing readers. And so when writers say that in their books and acknowledgments, they really mean it. It opens up a world. It's selfishly, it's always good for me. Are there any questions? Yes.
No. You talked about your upcoming deadline. Do you have a strategy for those? What are some of your routines to either
Oh,
avoid deadlines or prevent them, or get yourself in gear during a crunch time?
I'm given enough time to write the book. So if I wrote just an hour or two every morning, I'd have enough time to write a whole book. My problem is I need to condense the time they give me, because writing like 2 pages, like every other day or something, I can't be a part of the book as well. Stephen King wrote about this. He said he doesn't think you should take longer than 3 months to write a book, because otherwise you lose the electricity. And I don't think that's true of everyone, but it is true of me. So but I tend to procrastinate too long. And this year I have, because of my personal life. But so what I'm doing now is I'm getting up at 6:30 and I write a 3 month, a 3 hours, with trying not to stop and not to check email and not to look at the news. And then I take a break and then I write 3 more hours. So I'm trying, and then 3 at night. And the nighttime is mostly editing, going back over, because I write in a cyclical way. Every day I kind of go back over what I've written, and that gets longer and longer. Like I'm on chapter 23 now, and I can't go all the way back to the beginning, but at least the last 3 chapters. So when I'm finished with this book, it'll be almost a final draft. I don't write a rough draft and then go back. My ideal schedule, and that's what I'm going to do with this next book, especially now because my life is a little different. I'm going to get up at 6:30 and I'm going to give myself a certain number of words. Like ideally it would be 2,000 words. And then once that's finished, hopefully I could do that by 1 o'clock. Then the rest of the day is mine. And there's things I want to do here in Gloucester. I want to get involved in some things. And I haven't been able. We moved here 9 months before COVID. So I really didn't become a part of the community. And although I know a number of people because my daughter and her family live here, I'm not involved. I joined one generous gardeners group to go out. They garden for the whole city. And now that hurts my back too much. So I'm not going to rejoin that. I want to go do other things, though. I will find something to do. So that's my hope. And if I can keep to that, I'm going to give myself a couple months off after this book is finished. And then, of course, I get it back if there are any changes. And then I'll get it back again after the copywriter has done it. So it keeps coming back to me 3 times before it goes to the publisher and comes out toward the end of the year. But I'll send a synopsis in just so they can say, okay, go ahead. And also just practically speaking, the way my agent constructs my contract, they pay me in increments, and they will pay me a certain amount when they've approved a synopsis. And if I can, and then I'll give myself a couple months, and then I'll start it. And my goal is to finish it in 3 months. Is to finally write a rough draft, finish it in 3 months, and then still have a good month or two to make it perfect. And not screw up the lives of my grandkids and my family that don't quite understand these weeks when I'm just hibernating and trying to finish it. And I will do it this time. I'm determined. Any other questions?
Sandy?
Sandy. I can't hear you, Sandy.
Oh, that's okay. I have to unmute her. Sorry.
So one of the things we've talked about in our club was Willow's fiber art and how we all want to see it. And were you inspired by something, or we all were wondering what she did?
Oh, that I really liked her. I need to bring her back.
We loved her too.
I did a lot of research looking up fiber art, and it is amazing. I mean, have you looked at some of the pieces? It's a beautiful, I could bring Willow into the book I'm writing right now and thank all of you. I'll credit you in the acknowledgments because they're having another art show. So I will try and bring her back. I can send you pictures of what it was because I have to show you, this isn't art as exquisite as Willow's, but when I moved into this condo with my husband, one of the walls is all white, and we knew we couldn't buy a wonderful seascape that would fit that wall. So my daughter went out and brought this stick that she found from, and we had been talking about fiber art because of that book. She brought this stick when she was jogging one day, and then we found someone in Gloucester who dyes yarn, and we gave her a color thing, and she dyed some yarn for us, and this is what it looks like. Can you see it?
Oh, wow. Oh.
Isn't that pretty? So, oh, that's nice that I could just do that. But that art that came from that book, actually. I mean, hers is much more exotic. But I can't quite describe it to you, but look up online and you'll find one that, or I can send an email. I have your email address, in fact. I could send you a picture of it.
Thank you. We love all the little nuances in your books from the,
Oh,
I'm forgetting the name of the band, the something fish,
oh yeah.
fractured,
Fractured fish. Yes.
and the recipes. We're thinking about
Oh,
it. Anyway, we love all your little nuances.
well, a couple of the recipes are from this friend from London that I talked about because Kristen has published two, and I think she's publishing a third cookbook, and they're gorgeous. And she writes about what she's seeing in London and things, and where she got an idea for this recipe. She's an amazing cook. Her name is Kristen Fredrickson, and I think she has a blog about Kristen in London or something like that. But if you look up her cookbook, I think there'll be some pictures of it. Her recipes are a little too exotic for me, but some of them aren't. And so she gave me recipes for two different books, which then we both can help market each other.
Sally, what is Kristen's last name in case we want to?
Sure, it's Kristen Fredrickson.
Okay, Frederickson.
Fredrickson, Fredde. Yeah, and
Yeah.
she's
We'll look
she's
her
on
up.
she's on Facebook, and she does a lot in London that's interesting. She's a bell ringer in one of their cathedrals, and she goes into poorer sections of the city and teaches little kids how to cook. She's just really interesting.
Well, we're coming to the end of our hour and I want to respect your time and I really appreciate you doing this, but I'm so glad Sandy asked about or said something about the recipes because that is one of my favorite parts of the book is the
Oh,
food.
well, good. I'm glad to hear that.
And
I do love to cook, so.
yes, it definitely comes through in your writing. But
the publishers didn't ask for that. They suggested a knitting pattern, but they didn't suggest the menus or the recipes, but I like the recipes, so I just add them. One thing about putting knitting in I do try and ask designers if they will give me a pattern that's sort of unique. One time I asked a manager of a knitting shop in Kansas City. She also had put out a book about a book of patterns. So I asked her if it was the book that's the anniversary shawl. There's a book about an anniversary shawl for Nell and Ben's anniversary. And I asked her to create an anniversary shawl. And she did. And I sent it in, but she had never made it, and I hadn't had time to make it. And it was full of mistakes. And that was terrible. That was just, and I had one wonderful reader who was a really good knitter, and she was able to correct the mistakes. The designer sent me a couple corrections, but this gal who lives in Western Kansas, I never met her, but she was wonderful. And she sent me a new pattern, and I did put it on my website and places. But you hate to do that to readers, knitters to think they have and there was no place to go for, to find the corrections.
Sandy asked, does Sally have any recommended knitting patterns?
Well, the one right now, I'm just knitting fingerless gloves, and there's a million of those on Ravelry, and that's usually I just pull one off, and I'm knitting those because my hands get so cold when I'm typing in the winter here, and so those help. And I wear them out, actually. So I don't have any particular pattern.
That pattern is on your website, I believe, for the fingerless gloves.
Is it?
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions before Sally is?
It's hard. It's a little hard to hear from the back, but.
Thank you very much. It's been great.
Oh, well, my thanks go to you. It's been wonderful to make this trip to Wisconsin. I've really loved it very, very much. Thank you so much. And thank you, Sandy, for starting this. And I'm just sorry I didn't get the chili. Well, I hope to see you all again sometime. You know where to find me. Thank you. This was a pleasure.
It was fun to see you guys.
Yeah, you too, Sandy.
Thank you so much.